Behind the rising tensions of early 20th century Europe stood forces that rarely appeared in newspapers, private financial circles quietly shaping national decisions. These groups were not bound by borders or flags. Their interests were global, stretching from London to New York. While diplomats exchanged formal letters, the silent architects of capital observed markets, monitored bonds, and evaluated how shifting alliances could influence their influence. They did not openly seek conflict, yet they understood that moments of instability could reshape entire economic landscapes. As nations expanded armies and modernized technologies, these financial networks analyzed how economic dependencies between empires could become tools of subtle influence. Their conversations took place in calm offices, far from public view, where the future of Europe was not predicted by generals, but by interest rates, gold reserves, and the fragile balance between ambition and caution. As Europe moved into a new century, networks of influence stretched far beyond royal courts and parliaments. Financial families, international banks, and investment groups built a web that connected capitals through loans, trade routes, and industrial partnerships. These connections were not sinister. They were simply the hidden machinery of a rapidly modernizing world. Yet their scale allowed them to shape events in subtle ways. A delayed loan could shift a nation's military plans. A sudden investment could spark an industrial boom. Behind every negotiation stood people who understood the world through numbers rather than borders. They watched the growth of railroads, steel factories, and naval fleets, calculating how each development might ripple across continents. While newspapers focused on kings and ministers, these unseen strategists analyzed balance sheets, believing that the true map of power was drawn not on political charts, but in ledgers and contracts that quietly bound nations together. The early 1900s marked a dramatic transformation as industries expanded at unprecedented speed. Coal, steel, and oil became the lifeblood of nations, creating new fortunes and new dependencies. Major banks and private financial groups watched this industrial race closely, understanding that modern power was no longer measured only by territory, but by production capacity. Factories lit up city skylines, and railway lines stitched distant regions into unified markets. As companies grew into multinational giants, their financial backers gained influence not through political speeches, but through investment capital. These silent stakeholders recognized that whoever controlled the flow of industrial resources could quietly influence diplomacy, trade agreements, and national priorities. While citizens celebrated progress and innovation, behind the scenes, a new competition emerged, one driven not by armies but by the ability to finance mines, shipyards, and machinery that shaped the century to come. By the early 20th century, Europe appeared powerful on the surface, yet beneath the grandeur lay a fragile balance. Empires depended on trade routes, foreign investments, and industrial partnerships that tied their fortunes together. Statesmen believed they were navigating political tensions, but financial observers saw deeper currents shaping the future. Markets reacted instantly to rumors, and even a minor diplomatic disagreement could unsettle investors across continents. As alliances tightened and rivalries sharpened, banks monitored gold reserves and currency flows with growing concern. They understood that great powers were not only competing on battlefields, but also in the subtle arena of economic influence. The slightest shift in confidence could weaken an empire more effectively than any weapon. What held Europe together was not trust, but the delicate interplay of mutual financial interests. An invisible cord that could either maintain peace or snap under pressure. While governments held public meetings and diplomatic dinners, far quieter discussions shaped the direction of nations. In private offices lined with ledgers and maps, financial advisors, industrial magnates, and influential bankers exchanged ideas about the shifting international climate. These were not conspiracies, but practical conversations about protecting investments, stabilizing currencies, and predicting global changes. They analyzed the effects of tariffs, resource shortages, and emerging industries, recognizing patterns long before officials did. Their insights often guided national decisions indirectly, not through commands, but through the flow of credit and the promise of economic support. Many political leaders relied heavily on these private forecasts, aware that the future of their countries depended as much on financial resilience as on diplomacy. The true negotiations often took place behind closed doors, where the language was numbers and the stakes were stability. As industries expanded and nations borrowed heavily to keep pace, warning signs began to appear. Debt levels rose, markets fluctuated unpredictably, and competition for resources intensified. Financial analysts sensed an approaching storm, not necessarily a political one, but an economic disruption capable of shaking the foundations of empires. They monitored trade deficits, unstable currencies, and risky foreign investments with growing concern. Some advised caution, urging governments to slow their spending and rebuild reserves, but political leaders felt pressured to maintain rapid development. The gap between economic reality and national ambition widened. The world was becoming interconnected faster than it could stabilize, creating tensions that no single institution could control. The storm was not yet visible to the public, but those who studied numbers rather than headlines understood that Europe's financial equilibrium was close to breaking. In a world already strained by economic tension, even a small crisis had the potential to trigger larger instability. When diplomatic disputes arose, markets shivered. When a single bank reported losses, investors across continents reacted nervously. Financial institutions were deeply connected, and fear could travel faster than any ship or telegraph message. Advisors warned that confidence itself had become a fragile asset, one that could evaporate with a rumor. As governments struggled to reassure their populations, private financial groups recognized that the true danger lay not in any single event, but in the chain reaction it could ignite. This era was a reminder that uncertainty, once awakened, could move silently through societies, reshaping decisions and accelerating tensions long before anyone understood its full consequences. As Europe's political alliances shifted, financial institutions adapted just as quickly. They studied treaties not for their diplomatic intentions, but for their economic consequences. A new alliance could change trade patterns. A broken partnership could destabilize markets overnight. Analysts noted how nations increasingly aligned themselves not only with those who shared their political views, but with those whose industries, banks, and resource networks supported their growth. Economies were becoming intertwined in ways that made separation nearly impossible. While leaders spoke of loyalty and national pride, financial observers saw a map defined by supply chains, investments, and mutual dependence. These shifting alliances created both opportunity and risk, forming a landscape where a single decision could either strengthen stability or unravel years of interconnected progress. As uncertainty deepened, national leaders faced choices that carried immense consequences. Every decision, whether about tariffs, industry, or diplomacy, sent waves through financial markets. Advisors attempted to guide officials by providing projections and risk assessments, yet even the most cautious predictions could not account for the rapidly changing global climate. Some leaders felt trapped between public expectations and economic realities. The pressure to appear strong often led to bold announcements that unsettled investors. Private financial groups, meanwhile, quietly adjusted their strategies, shifting capital and preparing for possible disruptions. Many sensed that the world was approaching a turning point, where even well-intentioned decisions might create unexpected outcomes. The weight of these choices grew heavier each day, signaling a moment when Europe's fragile stability could no longer hold. Long before the public sensed danger, financial observers noticed signs of an invisible collapse. Trade slowed, credit tightened, and companies struggled to secure funding for expansion. These changes were subtle at first, but together they signaled a deep imbalance. Some banks quietly reduced risky loans, while investors redirected their capital to safer markets. Those who analyzed global patterns saw that the foundations of international cooperation were weakening. It was not a dramatic event, but a gradual erosion, like cracks forming beneath a grand building. The public celebrated progress, unaware that the economic machinery powering their world was faltering. Analysts knew that once the underlying structure gave way, events would accelerate beyond control. Europe was standing on a ridge, and the slightest tremor could push it into a new and uncertain era. As the tension reached its peak, nations made decisions with far-reaching consequences. These choices were often driven by incomplete information, political pressure, or misinterpreted intentions. Financial advisors watched with unease, knowing that even a small miscalculation could trigger a wave of reactions throughout interconnected markets. Leaders believed they were protecting their national interests, but many failed to recognize how deeply their economies relied on cooperation. Behind closed doors, bankers and industrialists warned of the risks, urging caution, but momentum pushed governments forward. The world had become too tightly woven for drastic actions to remain isolated. When the miscalculations finally collided, they created a chain reaction no one could reverse. It was not a single mistake, but a series of small errors, each amplified by the complex machinery of modern finance, that led Europe toward a dramatic turning point. When the long-awaited breaking point finally arrived, the world was unprepared for its scale. Nations looked for someone to blame, yet the truth was far more complex. The roots of the crisis lay not in a single event, but in decades of economic imbalance, silent negotiations, industrial competition, and fragile interdependence. As the curtain lifted, citizens realized how deeply financial forces had shaped their world, not through manipulation, but through the natural consequences of intertwined economies. In the aftermath, historians and economists began to analyze how invisible decisions had influenced visible outcomes. The lesson was clear. Power in the modern world was not held solely by armies or governments, but also by the networks of capital that connected nations in both prosperity and vulnerability. Understanding these forces became essential to preventing future turmoil, reminding humanity that peace required more than diplomacy. It required balance.